So imagine stepping into a courtroom, right? And you are facing criminal charges.
Okay.
But instead of establishing an alibi or, I don't know, calling character witnesses or arguing the statute, you basically just pull out a chalkboard.
Oh, going full goodwill hunting on them.
Yeah, exactly.
Huh?
You proceed to use the laws of thermodynamics, the CAP theorem from computer science, and complex network topology to, like, mathematically prove that the crime you're accused of is physically impossible.
It is just a complete collision of worlds. You have this, 19th century mechanical legal theory slamming headfirst into 21st century complex system science.
It really is. And welcome to our deep dive.
Yeah.
Today, you and I are going to unpack this highly unusual, totally mind-bending legal defense from a real-world case.
It's a wild one.
Right. And to do this, we are looking at a really fascinating stack of sources. It's a collection of analytical reports generated by major AI models, so ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, Quinn, and Grok.
All heavy hitters.
Yeah. And they were all fed the exact same defense document written by an independent scholar. So our mission today is to explore how this scholar attempted to completely deconstruct a criminal charge using hardcore statistical physics.
And just real quick, before we get too deep into the math, I should point something out for you listening. Because the original sources deal with the Chinese judicial system, they inevitably touch on some highly politically charged issues.
Right, yeah.
So just to be totally clear up front, our goal today isn't to take a political stance or endorse any specific viewpoint. I mean, we are strictly impartial here.
Absolutely.
Our mission is just to look at the raw mechanics of this legal defense as evaluated by these AI models and to just convey the scientific and legal ideas that are in those original reports.
Spot on. So the subject of these AI reports is Dr. Chen Wan. He's an independent scholar with an advanced academic degree, and she was arrested and eventually sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. Yeah. And the specific criminal charge was, quote, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. But when you actually look at the underlying actions that triggered this charge, it basically consisted entirely of forwarding, commenting on, and liking posts on social media.
And the content he was interacting with, it was kind of a mix, right?
Yeah.
It included official posts from the U.S. Embassy, certain political cartoons, specifically one the reports refer to as the Umbrella Girl, and various academic articles.
Wait.
And from his prison cell, Dr. Chen wrote this massive document titled The Blood Letter of Self-Defense and Accusation from Prison.
Which is the exact document that all these AI models analyzed. And what's really fascinating is how these different models parse the initial constitutional arguments he makes, like even before he gets to the physics part.
Oh, yeah. The AI analysis on the legal theory is super interesting.
Yeah, so for instance, Gemini focused really heavily on Article 35, which guarantees freedom of speech.
Yeah.
The AI points out this inherent logical flaw where the prosecution was treating opinions, art, and academic shares as rumors or false information.
Because you can't really prove art is false.
Exactly. You simply cannot empirically prove that a political cartoon like the Umbrella Girl is a false rumor. It's an expression, It's not a statement of fact. So criminalizing it kind of violates the whole principle of proportionality.
Right, and Glock's analysis took that a step further, actually. It highlighted how treating art as a quantifiable rumor fundamentally misunderstands the nectar of digital communication.
Yeah.
And then DeepSeek, it drilled really deeply into Article 38, which protects human dignity. Because during the trial, Dr. Chen attempted to use his professional scientific background to, mount a defense.
As you would.
Right. But the presiding judge reportedly ordered him to just shut up and demanded that he only answer yes or no to the prosecution's questions.
Man. And DeepSeek's report flags this as stripping Chen entirely of his dignity as a rational subject. Like, he isn't allowed to reason. He's only allowed to comply.
Exactly.
Then Quinn brings up Article 33, equality before the law. The model highlights this glaring selective enforcement issue because the official media outlets and the originators of these posts, like the people who actually drew the cartoons or wrote the articles, they weren't punished.
Yeah, that's a huge discrepancy.
Right. But Chen, who's just this independent scholar merely amplifying them to a tiny audience, he gets sent to prison.
Well, and those discrepancies in enforcement really set the stage for, honestly, the most surprising legal maneuver in the trial because the prosecution had to prove malicious intent, right?
Right.
And they decided to literally use his background against him.
Oh, I am so glad you brought this up because reading through these AI summaries, this specific detail just jumped right off the page for me. The court literally used his high education to establish his guilt.
It's wild.
They argued that because he has an advanced degree, he, quote, should have known better. They literally used his intellectual capacity as evidence of malice.
It's so backward.
Right. Like, think about it. That is like pulling someone over for going 3 miles over the speed limit and doubling their fine just because they happen to have a physics degree and should intuitively understand how momentum works.
That's a perfect way to put it.
You are punishing a person's intellectual capacity rather than their actual action.
Yeah, and the models universally flag this as a severe constitutional violation. ChatGPT synthesizes this as a form of ideological control that directly violates Article 47, which guarantees academic freedom.
Right.
Because the very definition of academic research involves, gathering foreign ideas, comparing contradictory texts, and analyzing diverse viewpoints. Penalizing his intellect like that is just a massive category error in the application of justice.
So if the judge refuses to let him debate the law and uses his own brain against him, Chen realizes he has to shift the battlefield entirely.
He has to go somewhere they can't follow.
Exactly. He has to prove that the public order he supposedly disrupted is just a mathematical fiction. And to do that, he pulls a concept straight out of Silicon Valley.
Yes, the CAP theorem.
Yep.
So he brings in this concept created by computer scientist Eric Brewer back in the year 2000, specifically to describe the fundamental limits of distributed systems.
And for you listening, if you're not familiar, a distributed system is really just a massive network of computers working together.
Right.
So any massive social media platform, Twitter, Facebook, Weibo, they were all distributed systems. And the CAP theorem basically states that any distributed system can only simultaneously guarantee 2 out of 3 possible traits.
And those are consistency, availability, and partition tolerance.
Right. You cannot mathematically have all 3. You have to pick 2.
So to break that down, consistency means every single node or, every user's screen shows the exact same data at the exact same moment.
Okay.
Availability means the system always responds to a user's request. It doesn't just freeze up or lock you out when you click something.
Nobody wants that.
Exactly. And partition tolerance means the system keeps working even if parts of the network lose connection with each other, which, happens constantly in the real world. Cell signals drop, cables get cut, servers go down.
Right. And because real-world networks inevitably have partitions, these social media platforms absolutely must choose partition tolerance. They have no choice.
Yeah.
And because their entire business model relies on you endlessly scrolling and engaging, they have to choose availability. They cannot afford for the app to just freeze every time a server lags somewhere in the world.
They lose millions.
Exactly. Therefore, by the strict laws of mathematics and computer science, they are forced to sacrifice consistency. Data on a social media platform is simply never perfectly synchronized across millions of users.
And ChatGPT's analysis of this part of the defense is brilliant. It points out that lag, out-of-order posts, and overlapping contradictory viewpoints that are visible at different times, they are not bugs in the system.
Yeah.
They are mathematically guaranteed features. Inconsistency, or chaos, is a built-in physical property of the network's architecture.
Think of it like comparing a bustling city market to a military parade.
Okay, I like this.
If you want everyone to march in perfect lockstep, which is perfect consistency, you have to completely shut down the organic flow of the city. You have to barricade the streets and stop people from moving freely.
Right.
But if you want the market to be open and functional, you want availability, you have to accept the chaotic noise, the haggling, the overlapping conversations, people bumping into each other. You can't arrest a guy buying apples and charge him with disturbing the peace simply because the market is loud.
Because the market is literally designed to be loud.
Exactly.
That analogy perfectly captures the profound legal insight Chen is making here. The AI models identified that the judicial system basically made a fundamental category error.
Right.
They took the intrinsic, mathematically unavoidable background noise of a distributed network and they treated it as a specific, targeted criminal outcome caused by Dr. Chen.
Yeah, they confused the natural state of the medium with the result of a crime.
Precisely.
Okay, but let's play devil's advocate and push the boundaries of Chen's defense here for a second. The network is naturally chaotic. Sure, we've established that.
Okay.
But couldn't Chen's forwarding of these political cartoons and articles have acted as an accelerant? Like, couldn't his actions have taken that natural background noise and sparked genuine structural damage to the system?
And that linear assumption is exactly what the prosecution is relying on, and Chen anticipates it.
He's ready for it.
Totally. He pivots his defense from the CIP theorem directly into network topology, looking specifically at how social networks are physically structured.
And he bases this on the Barabasi-Albert model, focusing on scale-free networks.
Right.
Which is the idea that social networks aren't just these random, evenly distributed webs where everyone is connected to exactly 10 other people. They follow a power law distribution.
The easiest way to think about this is like the United States airline system. If the network were just random, you'd have direct flights between every single tiny town. But that's obviously not how it works. Most cities are what we call edge nodes. They only have a couple of flights a day.
Right, like smaller regional airports.
Exactly. But a city like Atlanta or Chicago, those are massive hubs with thousands of connections every single day.
Right. So a blizzard hitting a tiny edge node city like, I don't know, Peoria, Illinois, barely affects the national travel grid.
Yeah, a few people get delayed, but the system keeps functioning.
But if a massive storm shuts down Atlanta, the entire country's travel infrastructure basically collapses.
Yes.
And social media works the exact same way. You have hubs, celebrities, official state media, mega influencers, and then you have a massive, almost infinite long tail of edge nodes, which are just regular, everyday users.
And the AI sources are very clear about Dr. Chen's position in this topology. He was the ultimate edge node.
Yeah.
He had fewer than 100 followers. And the reports note that most of those followers were either bots or just completely inactive accounts. He had almost zero interaction on the posts he shared.
Okay, so he's clearly an edge node. But how does pointing out his own lack of influence mathematically exonerate him, like legally speaking?
So DeepSeek's analysis zeroes in on Chen's use of research by Cohen, Haviland, and Ben Abraham. It's all about network robustness.
Okay.
These researchers mathematically proved that in a scale-free network, randomly removing or activating edge nodes has practically zero impact on the macrostructure or global connectivity.
Because it's too decentralized at the edges.
Exactly. The network is insanely robust at the edges. The mathematical threshold for the network to collapse from edge node activity actually approaches 100%.
Wow.
You would literally have to remove or radicalize almost every single normal user simultaneously to break the system from the bottom up.
Okay, but wait, what about the butterfly effect? You know, we have all heard the trope that a butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil can set off a tornado in Texas. Couldn't one single retweet from an edge node like Chen by some absolute freak chance get picked up by the right algorithm, go wildly viral, and cause that system collapse?
And the AI models note that this is basically the prosecution's entire underlying philosophy. They assume this linear mechanical causality where any one tweet could theoretically equal social collapse.
Right.
But Chen counters this by diving into complex system science, specifically self-organized criticality, or SOC.
Oh, this is the sandpile stuff.
Yes, he pulls in Purbach's sandpile model to explain this. So imagine you are slowly dropping grains of sand onto a flat table. A small pile starts to form.
Oh, I'm visualizing it.
For a long time, dropping one more grain does absolutely nothing, or maybe it causes a tiny localized shift in the sand. The system is inherently stable.
Sure.
But eventually you drop enough grains that the pile gets incredibly steep. It reaches what physicists call a critical state.
Right.
Only then, when the entire system is on a knife's edge, can one single grain trigger a massive avalanche.
So avalanches, or in the context of this trial, massive viral information cascades that might actually cause serious disorder, they do not happen in a vacuum.
No.
They only happen when the system itself is already in a critical or supercritical state.
Exactly. And scientists don't just guess when a network is in a critical state. They measure it.
Right. There's math for this.
They use a mathematical concept called the branching process, which is based on the Galton-Watson theorem. They calculate something called the mean offspring number, which is usually represented by the letter M.
And in social media terms, M is basically simply the average number of secondary shares a single post generates, right?
Spot on.
Let's actually walk through this math, because Gemini and Quinn both highlight this as the absolute nail in the coffin for the prosecution.
It really is.
So if M is 0.5, that means for every 100 people who share a post, only 50 of their followers share it, and then 25, then 12, and so on. The cascade mathematically must die out. This is a subcritical regime.
Yeah.
Now, if M is exactly 1, the spread remains constant. You are in the critical state.
Right, on the edge.
Exactly. And only if M is greater than 1, the supercritical state, can the sharing actually explode exponentially into a viral avalanche.
And the simulation data in the AI reports calculated Chen's M value based on his specific network parameters. So his low follower count, his lack of engagement, and the absence of algorithmic boosting.
And his M value wasn't 10. It wasn't even 1.
No.
His average branch number was M equals 0.12.
Which is incredibly low. 0.12 puts him in the deep subcritical regime.
Which means, under the Galton-Watson extinction theorem, a cascade starting with an M of 0.12 will die out with a probability of essentially 100%.
Yes.
It is mathematically a dead end. The simulated expectation of total shares for his post across the entire network was roughly 1.
And to put the absurdity of that into perspective, the legal threshold for establishing serious disorder in some of these judicial interpretations, it requires thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of shares and interactions.
Right.
And his mathematical expectation was 1.
It's just wild.
Hmm.
The AI reports actually pulled a direct quote from Chen's defense that perfectly crystallizes this. He said, quote, "My forwarding is like breathing out carbon dioxide. You can't sentence me to life in prison for global warming because of it."
That is a phenomenal analogy.
It's so good.
But look at the legal implications of that math. It completely flips the burden of proof back onto the state.
Because the math proves an edge node can't start an avalanche on its own.
Exactly.
So if the prosecution claims his single retweet actually posed a threat of system-wide collapse, they would have to prove that the entire social media network was already in a highly unstable, supercritical state.
Which is a crazy thing to try to prove.
Right. They would have to legally admit that the sandpile was already perilously steep and just waiting for a spark.
And Chen points out the ultimate trap here. Even if the prosecution were willing to admit that society was already on the brink of collapse, they still lose.
Because of Article 16.
Yes. Under Article 16 of the criminal law, if an outcome happens because of an unforeseeable accident or a systemic state beyond the defendant's personal control, it cannot be classified as a deliberate crime. If the camel's back is already broken from 1,000 pounds of structural failure, you cannot legally prosecute the final piece of straw.
Wow. So the physics proves he couldn't have caused the chaos.
Yeah.
But Chen doesn't stop at simply defending himself, does he?
Not at all.
He takes this entire framework of complex system science and turns it, like a mirror, directly onto the judicial system itself.
And this is where Grok and ChatGPT both note the absolute philosophical masterstroke of the defense. We just established that edge nodes, regular everyday citizens like Chen cannot break a scale-free network because the topology is incredibly robust against low-level random activity.
Right.
But what is a scale-free network vulnerable to?
Targeted attacks on the hub nodes. Like we said earlier, if you take out Atlanta, the whole airline grid fails.
Precisely. And Chen asks this absolutely devastating question. Who are the hub nodes in the societal network?
The state apparatus, the official media outlets, the judicial organs themselves.
Exactly. Chen argues that when the judicial system abuses its power, when it selectively enforces laws, ignores the Constitution, and arbitrarily silences academics, they are the ones acting as malfunctioning hub nodes.
Oh, wow.
They are the entities injecting massive systemic instability into the social network.
So by targeting a harmless edge node and throwing a scholar in prison for a mathematically meaningless retweet, the system is actively pushing the entire society toward that dangerous, supercritical state.
Yeah.
The state is the one piling the sand dangerously high.
He is no longer just proving his own innocence. He is diagnosing the actual source of systemic risk. He is mathematically stating that the arbitrary abuse of power used to silence him is the true threat to public order, not his, digital carbon dioxide.
That is incredible. You have a scholar sitting in a prison cell facing a judge who is literally yelling at him to shut up and just say yes or no. And his response is to use the fundamental laws of physics and network topology to prove that the prosecution's entire concept of reality is structurally flawed.
It's masterful. And the grand takeaway unified across all these AI analyses is this glaring disconnect.
Yeah.
We have a 19th century legal mindset relying on mechanical linear causality, this belief that one action directly equals one massive reaction.
Right.
And it is attempting to govern a 21st century nonlinear complex digital network where causality is distributed, naturally chaotic, and governed by scale and mathematical thresholds.
So what does this all mean for you listening to this right now? Why should you care about the mathematical defense of a scholar in a court halfway across the world? Because you and I and everyone we know exist in these exact same scale-free networks.
Every single day.
Exactly. Every time you open Twitter or Instagram or TikTok, you are participating in a system completely governed by the CAP theorem and self-organized criticality.
Yeah.
Understanding the sheer difference in power between an edge node and a hub node, and understanding how information actually cascades or mathematically fails to cascade, is a vital skill.
It absolutely is. It equips you with a scientific BS detector.
Seriously.
When you understand that systems have a mathematically guaranteed background noise of chaos, you become highly immune to fear-mongering. You are far less susceptible to platforms or authorities claiming that normal, everyday expression is some sort of catastrophic threat to order.
Right. Because if you know your man value is 0.12, you know your post isn't going to break the internet no matter what a moderation algorithm or a politician claims.
Exactly.
Which brings us to our final thought today. We started this deep dive by picturing a courtroom that operates like a clean, predictable, mechanical clock. But we found out the real world actually works like a messy, chaotic sandpile. If legal systems are still trying to punish citizens based on outdated linear models of physical cause and effect, well, how many other areas of our lives, from corporate regulations to sweeping social media policies, are trying to police the chaos of complex systems, using rules that mathematically make absolutely no sense?
It really makes you wonder.
If the X-ray machine is fundamentally broken, maybe it's time we stop pretending we can use it to see the bones.